So one of England's top footballers wants a world where there's no anonymity online. There are different ways that could work on the sites we use here in the UK, and we'll hear about those in a bit. But that world does already exist in China.
What my job entails is doing a lot of the things that we tend to do when we go home, but on work time. So watching TV, listening to the radio, looking at social media, but all in Chinese and telling the BBC what's coming out of the media.
Kerry Allen is a media analyst for BBC Monitoring. She told me that if you have an account on one of the two big Chinese social media platforms, WeChat and Weibo, your identity has to be verified.
When you first register, there are a lot of steps you have to go through. One that a lot of Chinese apps use nowadays is that they ask you to verify a mainland phone number, and same for overseas as well, so people automatically have your contact number. You're often asked for detail about you as a person. One of the details that I give out quite a lot when I'm registering for a Chinese account, and you have to in order to register, is your passport or your ID number. So instantly, instantly that means that people have so much data on you in terms of where you live, your real name, and also the city you were born in, and sometimes your address.
Are there any accounts that aren't anonymous at all in China?
There are, but they're not official. So what happens is the Chinese government has something that's known as the 50 Cent Party. And what these are, they're basically a party of thousands of people who are paid 50 cents to post messages in line with the government's message. So what they do is they're anonymous. Nobody can find out who these people are, but they get a little bit of extra pocket money, basically, if they set up accounts and they post messages in line with the government's message.
Kerry says these anonymous accounts have been reacting to the recent protests in Hong Kong.
Straight away, you'll see thousands of social media comments coming in saying, I support the Hong Kong police, and pro-government messages like this. And these are, sometimes they use very, very formal language. I see the same phrases being used again and again. This is indicative that they are 50 Cent Party members.
These state-sponsored anonymous accounts are designed to back the decisions of the government and drown out the voices of the people who don't.
Recently, back in July, Shanghai implemented a law which meant that everybody in the entire city, and this is the biggest city in the world in terms of population and density, had to start recycling en masse. If they didn't recycle, if they put even one thing in the wrong bin, they would get fined. And China wanted to show that there was huge support for this, because there was this dialogue online originally of people saying, oh my gosh, there are so many products, I don't know what goes in what bin. I'm literally freaking out because I could get a huge fine for this and it could impact my social credit. And I was seeing some extremely formal language and tens of thousands of social media comments appearing one after another. So things like, I hugely endorse Shanghai's environmental law, stuff that you just wouldn't say colloquially. China has what's known as Kouyu, which is spoken Chinese, and Shumianyu, which is a much more formal way of writing. And there was this real kind of emphasis on Shumianyu, these really formal, I hugely endorse, I think this is tremendously effective for Shanghai, very, very formal language like this. And a lot of these kind of phrases just kind of showed that the 50 Cent Brigade were very, very powerful, and that the government censors at the same time were powerful in removing that earlier dialogue and trying to get people focused on the positives of this, even if those comments might not have been true.
How are Chinese celebs treated in this world then, in comparison to celebrities in the Western world who have social media and it's out there for the public to criticize or love?
Well, I've seen a big change in recent years. I mean, one thing I will say is that a lot of people on Twitter or Facebook, they will often see big reaction to politicians or big senior government figures on social media, and a lot of comments come off the back of this, and there's a lot of criticism. China doesn't have this. Its officials don't get involved on social media whatsoever. If you wanted to be a celebrity in China, much like in the West, you had to be a bit different, a bit edgy. Increasingly, there's been a big change with this, and it's wanted state-sponsored celebrities to really be in the limelight.
The country's tax authority has ordered A-list movie star Fan Bingbing to pay about $129 million in overdue taxes.
Kerry told me about Fan Bingbing. She's as big as Angelina Jolie in China.
She basically got a big telling off by the government. So after this came out, there was a big push by Chinese media for celebrities to be more socially responsible. There were a number of ways that they were doing this. Sina Weibo in particular said that if people had more than 100,000 followers, it could basically give them the power to ban people for 3 days if they posted messages that were abusive or could be seen as unkind. And also there are censors in the government who remove content that they just don't agree with anyway. So there are people who are actually the police who work online, work with social media platforms like Sina Weibo to remove negative content, stuff that's sensitive, for example. So things like the independent media angle on the Hong Kong protests. If there's certain things that Beijing doesn't want to see, there are actual police in place to remove content directly.
Are people in China genuinely nicer to each other because no one's allowed to be anonymous? Or are there other factors, you think?
I think there are other factors. There's been a big propaganda campaign with the government anyway to push this concept of positive energy. One of the things I noticed that's very different about being here in the UK versus being in China is that when you open a newspaper, for example, here, there's always a lot of doom and gloom. There'll be a lot of critical stories about politicians. There might be crime-related stories. You open a newspaper and generally you feel a bit down. In China, there'll be a focus on the positives. Here in the West, if there was a flood and several people had died, that would be the story. In China, if that happened, the headline would be, the firefighters are working really hard to control the flood, and there'll be a lot of praise, focus on the firefighters. So it's more to do with the positive efforts of the authorities rather than the negative stuff that will make people feel down and unsafe.
Kerry said that because China has a huge population, it needs to keep a lot of people happy. And if people become scared, they'll start rebelling. So to avoid all this, the state basically puts a lot of effort into making the Chinese social media look like a happy place. But there's also an element of self-censorship. People know that if they talk openly about a controversial topic on social media, the government will know.
They do understand that on the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, that it's probably not a good idea to try and post images of what happened in 1989 because the government has so much information on them at registration level, it might keep a record on them. They could be taken into what's known as an administrative detention, which is you basically spend a few days in prison to think about what you've done.